So to make the Chelsea buns, you will need 450 grams of strong bread flour. I've actually used wholemeal bread flour here because that's what I had in the cupboard. 250 mils of milk, 50 grams of caster sugar, 10 grams of yeast. I've used 1.5 sachets because sachets come in 7 grams and I needed 10 grams in total. 50 grams of margarine and 2 eggs. So for the first step, I've warmed the milk on the stove. Unfortunately, it's a little bit hot at the moment, so I'll add the yeast in a few minutes. If I add the yeast now, the yeast might be killed, so I'm going to leave it a few minutes before I add the yeast. I'll give it a quick stir and then leave it to become frothy. I'm now going to rub the butter into the flour with my fingertips. I'm using my fingertips because that is the coldest part of your hands. If you used the palm, that would be too warm. So I'm going to mix the two together with my fingertips to resemble breadcrumbs. So now I've rubbed the butter into the flour, I've added the sugar, and I'm going to stir the two together. As you can see, the yeast in the milk has started to get quite frothy. That's because the yeast has been activated. The kitchen's nice and warm, so that makes it ideal conditions for the yeast to grow. If it was too hot, the yeast would be killed, and if it was too cold, nothing would happen. So now I'm going to add the 2 eggs and whisk it together. So I've mixed the sugar into the flour and I'm about to add the liquid. As you'll see, the liquid has actually risen quite a bit due to the fermenting of the yeast. So I only need 300 in total. If I add too much liquid, it's going to become quite a soggy mess. And if I don't add enough, it won't hold it together. So I'm going to use this wooden spoon and I'm going to stir it in bit by bit to make a nice dough. So I've mixed the dough with the wooden spoon and I've brought it all together using my hands. As you can see, there's quite a bit of liquid left over, so I wouldn't use too much or otherwise you might end up with a soggy mess. I'm now going to knead it for 5 minutes to make a nice, round, stretchy dough. So now I've kneaded my dough for 5 minutes. It's quite interesting. If you poke the dough with your finger, you can see it coming back together again. I'm now going to make the filling for the Chelsea buns. I've got 100 grams of mixed fruit here. I've actually used 50 grams of raisins and 50 grams of sultanas because that was what I had in the cupboard. Moving on, we've got some soft brown sugar. We've got some mixed spice. That's what I use in my Christmas cakes. And I've also melted 25 grams of butter. I did this in the microwave using a very low power. I've rolled out the pastry to 30 centimetres by 15 centimetres. The filling I have spread out over the dough. I actually had to use a little bit of extra melted butter around the edges because the filling sort of initially stayed in the middle. So I've spread it out by adding a bit more melted butter and then spreading out the raisins. I've now rolled out the dough, added the filling, and I'm now going to cut it into 8 pieces after I've rolled it up. I've used the 30 centimetre length in front of me and I've folded it away from me and I've got the seam on the bottom. I've then cut the roll into half, into quarters, into eighths. So I've made 8 little Chelsea buns. So now the Chelsea buns have been proving on top of the hob for half an hour. I'm now going to put them in the oven for 20 minutes. Take care and make sure you use an oven mitt. While they're in the oven, I've got the glaze to prepare. It's sitting here ready to go, so when the Chelsea buns come out of the oven, I can have boiled it and put it on top of them straight away. So now I'm making the glaze by letting the milk, the water and the sugar boil together for 3 minutes. Make sure you don't overheat it, because otherwise it will caramelise. So be careful and make sure you do it for the correct amount of time. I have now glazed them. As you can see, it's the white little bits. It looks a bit like a icing sugar mix on top of a fairy cake. I'm going to let these cool down a little bit, then I'm going to remove them and let them dry on a cooling rack. And here we are, the finished Chelsea buns. I've actually used a sharp knife and fork to tear them apart because they were very, very sticky. But I do hope you enjoy making them. I might, if I was making them another time, rather than putting them into an 8-inch sandwich tin as suggested in the recipe, I might put them separately onto a oven-proof tin, which I'd line and grease, just so they had a bit more space to grow, I suppose. But I'm very pleased with them and I hope you enjoy making them. And now, the washing up.